Fired Up is the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass New Education Series, and I'm your host, Demetra Theophanis. The Fired Up series is different than the Art Alliance's other programming in that it's free and open to the public. So when you see our events being advertised, please go ahead and share those registration links with your friends.
So if you get to talk to Oben, okay?
Sounds like we need to mute someone, Howard. Thank you. Okay, so we started off the education series by covering cold worked and laminate glass. Then we moved into large scale cast glass. We saw how cast glass and fused glass is applied in a public art setting. And then last month, we looked at the work of Richard Royal, one of the premier artists of the studio glass movement. And we wanted to start off this series by featuring some of the artists that have been in the glass world for decades, because they really laid the foundation for the innovation in the glass world that we're seeing today. And our guest artist today, Oben Abright, is the perfect example of someone who utilizes that foundation of studio glass, but really pushes the boundaries of this medium, combining it with cast glass and creating this hybrid technique that is not only incredibly innovative, but it also provides him with this really rich technical vocabulary that allows him to so vividly communicate his narrative sculptures. So I'm really excited to have him with us today. As we go on throughout the presentation, we'll be stopping for Q&A. So please go ahead and put your questions in the chat window. And now I would like to introduce Oben Abright, as well as David Austin of Austin Art Projects, who represents Oben. Welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, hi, Oben.
Hey.
I'll get to you in a second, buddy. Hi, everybody. This is David Austin from Kauai. I'm not going to lie. I would like to be in Oben's studio, but I'm also glad I'm here. So Oben's been very productive during this time. And I don't know if you've heard that from artists that with what's been going on, the less interruptions are actually bearing great fruit. So, and I think you'll see this with the tour that we're going to do with Oben today. We've done a short video that is still, I think, a work in progress, but it's really beautiful, has really beautiful imagery. Oben actually, Cookie Miller's on today, and her piece is featured in there. So I said, you've got to watch today. So anyway, I'm going to play this briefly for you. And if you guys have watched videos on Zoom presentations, there's a little bit of an audio glitch, but the images are quite beautiful. So it looks a little bit like the audio looks a little like a hostage video, but the images are really beautiful. So we're going to go ahead and play it for you today. So pardon me while I go to share my screen with you for just a moment. Okay, let's get big here.
I think it was sort of ingrained at a really early age that like art was everything, you know, and that there was this single pursuit in life to be an artist. It was never really a question. It was just instinctive that that's what I was. As a young artist growing up, I really saw my parents pursuing a very specific medium. They're both ceramic artists. And that medium and that movement, the studio art movement, was really the basis of what they came out of. And while that informed me, and that's really my education, it also allowed me to build on multiple disciplines and really start to link mediums together and find a way to make my own work through this amalgam of different art disciplines. Watching them, struggle through their own careers and the highs and lows of being artists, I think really drove me to try and accomplish something that would reflect all I had been given, you know, growing up in an art studio where I had the option to be an artist, because I think it's a privilege. I use mediums that contrast one another primarily, and the interest for me is how you amplify something like, say, the fragility of glass by putting it next to concrete. I like the mediums that our lives, our modern lives, are built out of, and we're living in concrete and glass cities now. So these are people made of concrete and glass. They're disappearing into the streets they're walking on. They're luminous beings that you see feel alive because of the medium you chose. They're not a static object. It's not a piece of stone. It interacts with the light in the room, the time of day. And those little nuances, I think, are what make, at least in figurative glass, make a figure really feel alive. And it has its own little personality. It really sets the bar high, knowing that this mold has taken hours and hours to create, and now you're going to risk it all in 30 seconds, and it's either going to come out or you're going to lose it all. It's kind of the only way I gamble. It's what stops a lot of people from taking it to that next place. And if you can't risk it all, then you're not going to innovate. You're not going to find the moments of triumph, because they're always contrasted with those moments of loss. You have to tell yourself you can make it again. If you lose it, you'll make it again. And the will to create work that's that difficult to produce makes each one that comes out that much more incredible, that it actually made it through this very risky process. For me, that sort of emulates our path in life. We are constantly trying to pursue our own vision, and the path is littered with those that haven't made it. When I wake up and think of what do I want to do today, I want to outdo myself. I want to try and do something bigger and crazier than I've done before. It's building on your own process that really makes the pursuit of art interesting. You try to accomplish something, you fall short, you go, oh, if I had just done this, it would have worked. And the next day you get up and you try it again. And when it does, that gratification of going, yes, I saw this very difficult idea through to the end, leads to the next one, is the inspiration for the next sculpture.
We good?
Everybody there? Okay, great. Demetra, I thought I would bounce it to you and you can introduce Oben, but we didn't talk about like protocol for questions, et cetera. So I thought you might want to let people know how we're going to handle questions.
Yeah, so we'll be kind of stopping at the end of each segment as we go through the presentation. So if you can just write your questions in the chat window, we will get to them throughout the program today. And now I'd like to hand things over to Oben Abright, who's in his studio today. Thank you, Oben. We're looking forward to this.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. You guys are one of the first groups to actually get to come to the new studio. I moved to this place about 5 years ago and have been steady building to try and complete my dream studio here. But I'm going to walk you through the process today of kind of how I make my work and try and describe as much as I can the path that has led me to create work like this. All my pieces pretty much start in clay, and clay was really my foundation. That's where I started in sculpture. And the more I did, the more I really wanted to reveal the interior of figures and try and describe the human condition in a way that didn't feel so static. And that really led me to pursue glass. But each piece still starts in clay, and I really take my subjects from my own life. So when I choose a figure, a muse, I often pull them from people I know. I don't really think that an artist should have filters between their subject and themselves. It's it's those sort of classic inspirations when you see somebody that inspires you to make a sculpture of them. Those intuitive moments you have to go with. And so in a way, these are really very classical muse portraits that are done. And while that's not the outcome of the final sculpture, that is where I start. So I'm going to zoom in a little here so you guys can see this. This is a clay original, and you can see that the figure is done in a plasticine clay. And I used to work in water-based clay, but I really changed that because this allows me to get another level of detail. I can work at the figure a lot longer, and really take that from life figure study and try and push it as far as I can to get as much of the figure realized as possible. So you guys can see that these little details all get done in this original sculpture before the mold is made. And a lot of the compositional choices come out in this point. A lot of the details are really refined at this point and then kind of get deconstructed through the rest of the process. So once the figure is made, I can turn you guys over here. This is another figure in clay, original clay. And after that, the mold is made. And you can see here, this is the mold. It's a polyurethane mold, and it's got a plaster mother mold over it. And what this really allows me to do is, after all this work that goes into the original sculpture, I'm able to really change the piece afterwards and do multiples. So I can, while I may have started with this original figure, I can then move to variations on that figure and change the narrative and change the context. And we'll go down the line here. You can see here's another original piece. And once these pieces are made, you know, it really allows me to add content after the fact. So that's why I start with a nude figure, so I can actually work with real clothing and change each piece. So it sort of becomes like a character in a story, and that narrative may change even though it's the same character. So moving down here, you can see here is the mold for that piece. And this is actually a wax that's been partially poured, so you guys can see it's a wax shell. So it's actually hollow, and it's very similar to the methods of bronze casting, lost wax casting. And that's kind of what started my interest in trying to achieve my clay pieces in glass. It was like, how can you do that? And I was able to try and find. We lose you guys here?
Yeah, somehow we got Nita Caskey's screen sharing.
Somebody came in and shared her screen.
All right, I'll wait.
We'll try and find her.
I'm here. Nita Caskey is here.
Stop your video.
There we go.
It's not on video. Okay.
Okay, so once the mold is made, I can really do multiples from this, and not each piece comes out. So I may try pieces in wax and they won't come to fruition. They won't actually make it to the end of the process. And we'll just move right down. You can kind of see into the mold here. This is, let me see if I can switch this for you guys. So you can see her details are all kind of realized in this this rubber mold, and that's really my master mold. Once I've got that, I can make all different kinds of versions of the same figure. So coming over here, I'm going to show you guys the wax stage, and this is my wax working area. And this is really where clothing and other content can be added. And you can see this is all real fabric, and I'll use different elements of texture, anything I think will really transfer well into glass. And that really allows me to change the composition at this stage. So even though this figure started as a nude, she's going to change into a new composition in the wax room. And all of this fabric then gets waxed with really hot wax. And as it dries, it freezes all the little folds. And if I do it right, I get right down to the thread in terms of detail. And so a lot of the sort of dreamscape that occurs of trying to put the figure into a context occurs in this wax stage. And I'm able to cut and change the original sculpture until I can come up with a new composition that really adds variation, so that even though it is a series of a single figure, it ends up being no two pieces are alike. They end up all different from this stage. And you can see over here, we have a bronze version of the same figure. And this bronze version, I've started working with bronze. This is one of my first bronzes, but I really love the interaction between media. And the goal here is to try and get her floating on a glass pillow. So what you're gonna end up seeing here is this will get waxed. And once it's waxed, it'll all freeze. And this is original pillow, or a real pillow rather. And the folds are all sort of part of the sculpting. You know, I spend a lot of time primping little details so that all of that will translate directly into the glass. And it's sort of that illusion of media where you're making something that feels soft, actually made out of this very, very hard medium. And the transparency is really what I'm after. The goal is to try and make it float and feel like she's on a very soft, transparent object. So this will get waxed, and then it'll freeze like this, and then I'll go ahead and cast the pillow. I realize we're supposed to be asking questions here. I didn't leave much time for it. So if there's any questions about the wax process, feel free to chime in.
I don't see any questions right now, Oben, in the chat window, but just a reminder to everyone that you can type questions in the chat and we will get to them throughout the presentation.
Okay.
All right.
So after the piece is done in wax, we come over here to the next mold stage. And let me see if I can show you guys this here. The next step really is the second mold stage, and that's the mold that is actually made to create the glass. And you'll see that what we have here is a wax that's inside the casing. And that casing is a stainless steel casing that then gets filled up with plaster. And once it's full of plaster, it's actually a plaster silica. It gets sprued, so I put vents into it, and that allows the back pressure in the mold to be released. And then I melt this wax out. And once the wax is melted out, I get a perfect negative shape of the figure. And that negative space is what we actually drop the bubble of glass into to create the final figure. So you can see, let's see if we can zoom in here. You can see this casing's been used quite a few times. It's a reusable casing, and once this piece is done, that's just one version. So I'll often do multiples. I'll do 3 of these figures in one kiln load, because quite often we'll lose at least one of them. I'd say on a new figure, I lose probably 50% of the waxes that make it into the glass studio. And so you never know which of them is going to come out. And you can see on this, I'm actually working with some vinyl, and I've started to sort of impregnate the vinyl with wax from the back. And that's allowed me to start getting these really fine details. This is actually a snake skin. And that kind of investigation into texture has been something I've really been interested in lately. Just pushing the illusion you can create in details through different media. So once this is done, we move over here, and I'm going to show you guys the cold shop.
Yeah, what?
Before we go there, Oben, I'm going to interject for a moment. We do have a
Sure.
couple of questions that popped up.
Absolutely.
Okay, the first one, they want to know if you use only natural fabrics.
No, I use anything I can get away with. So sometimes one of the pieces I'll show you in a moment, I actually used like a velvet. And it's really hard to work with synthetic fibers because they burn. So you don't have the same options as you would with a natural fiber. So I try and use a lot of cotton based fibers, but for the most part, you can get away with just about anything if you figure out how to do it. So the right temperature wax will allow you to use a synthetic, fiber. And again, these things are sort of a shot in the dark. You can't really tell what they're going to look like until you try it. So for example, here I have a snake skin, and that's a vinyl, which is completely synthetic. But if you do it right, you can find a way not to burn it and to actually get the impression of the texture to come out in the plaster. Not all of them make it. You can see in this case, I lost the nose on this figure, but you just can't predict those kinds of changes. They often occur without much warning, and you think you nailed the piece, and then you get it out 10 days later and find that, in fact, something in there changed during the mold process.
All right, and then we have someone that would like to know, is there a special latex blend that you use?
For the rubber molds, for the waxes?
I'm assuming, yeah.
I use a PMC, which is a smooth-on product, and it's a polyurethane mold material. It's pretty standard in the industry. It's a mold that could actually be poured probably 50 times, and I'll probably pour it less than 10 in the long run. I never do a series more than 10. For the most part, there are five to 10 figures for each mold. So the mold will live long after I've stopped using it.
Hey, Oben, can I interject something?
Sure.
And when you say 5 figures, my experience is each of them is different, meaning that you use
Oh,
the
yeah.
nude figure. It might be wrapped. One might have a hoodie. One might have a hoodie with a hood up. You even in some cases, and then you use your found fabrics. And recently, I guess in the last show was the first full nude figure without any wrap at all. So that's sort of bouncing back to your comment that each one's telling a little different story, even though you're using the same muse. Is that correct?
Yeah, I never make the same figure twice. So there are never two that are exactly alike. They're always different. And again, that's why I work in this long, drawn out kind of process with so many stages, is because each stage gives the opportunity to add variation. And it's so hard to come up with the original sculpture. It takes so long to sculpt that original figure that I really don't want to have to do that for every single resolution to that figure. So it really becomes like a character in a story. And that narrative, while that narrative might be a personal one for me, I think that for collectors, for the viewer, they're really projecting their own narrative onto that figure. So a lot of the choices made are to amplify that, to leave the subject universal so that other people can kind of project what they see in that character into the context of the figure. And so even though you see the same figure more than once, no two are alike.
I might interject if you don't mind too, and particularly while you're on that kind of red and that yellow one, which I think is the same figure.
It is, yeah.
I mean, it's not just the way you dress them. You'll grind the bottoms of the piece to create a different countenance with each piece. I can recall Lindsay where you did that, and one of them had her looking up and she was quite aloof. And you had another one where she was looking down, and it was the total opposite emotion just by changing the tilt, just as a human would tilt their chin or head, correct?
Absolutely. And you know, what I love about wax is that those gestures can be changed. Even though I started with that original clay sculpture, by the time it gets to this point in glass, so many changes have occurred because there's so many steps involved that give the opportunity to explore texture and color, and all those things change the context of the figure and the emotion. And that's what I really love about having this long drawn out linear process, is that the process itself adds so many nuances you couldn't anticipate. And that really does change the original figure to become something else. And so, you know, even though there is an original mold and there's so much work that goes into that first sculpture, it's a deconstructive process after that, of deconstructing the original figure into the glass figure. So are there more questions, or?
Yeah, we'll just do one more and then we'll save the others for a little later. Eric wants to know, how do you remove the pillow or fabric from the mold?
So I steam them out for the most part, but they can also be burned out. And in either case, the wax is removed and then the fabric is removed. And usually I try and just peel it out once there's no wax left. So typically I use a steamer to steam that wax out, and it's thrown away. And then I reach in while it's still hot and I peel the fabric out. And that allows me to really work with fabrics that you wouldn't want to burn out. You know, this was, I think, a texture from a bath mat. You know, this is a texture from a sweatshirt. And these are things that you wouldn't necessarily want to put in the kiln. So, you know, by steaming them, I'm able to actually get rid of the wax. They become soft again, and I can peel them out of the mold.
Okay, great. All right, we'll go ahead to the next segment and we'll come back for more questions in a bit.
Great. So you can see that a lot of these pieces are sitting here on this shelf. Some of them are very old. And in this case, this figure is in fact probably from 2011. And I made it and kind of hit a wall in that I wasn't sure how to engineer it to stand. And that's a huge part of the problem, is you can make a glass object that you can't necessarily complete as it was intended, because there is so much engineering involved. And you can see here, I've got the legs for this figure. And that is kind of where I stopped in 2011. My skill set at that point was not enough. I couldn't figure out how to make it stand. And so now I'm sort of revisiting it. And you can see here that this is the moil where the piece was broken off of the pipe. And all this will be cut off so that it fits her waist. And you can see here, this is her waist. This will be joined here with the upper torso. She's going to get a cast base that has her feet included on it. And then she'll stand with this stacked on top of here. And so sometimes you can realize work, but not quite. You hit a point where you can't figure out how to complete it. And as my career has gone on and I've done more figures, I've learned ways to resolve pieces of glass that otherwise I couldn't. So often these pieces will get put down until I can determine a way to resolve the piece or solve the problem, the engineering problem of how to make the piece stand. Okay, and all my pieces pretty much get a window polished into them. And you can see this piece has actually just been polished. Let me see if I can zoom in on it for you guys. So she's just been polished up here, and you can see that it really creates a window, and that window is letting light into the figure, and then it's bouncing around inside it, and that's what makes it glow. And so by adding this window, I really can control the amount of light that enters the figure and where it illuminates the figure. So if I want to focus on the face, I polish a window towards the back of the head. And part of the goal is really to create a piece that will allow her mood to change during the time of day, so that when she's in natural light, she changes from morning till night. She has a different feel. And you'll find that all these figures feel much different when they're illuminated versus when they're not. And actually, if you look really close, let me see if I can get you guys to see this. You can actually see the fibers of the fabric. See if that'll transfer. This was a velvet, and it was actually a polyester fiber. So I'm pretty proud that this even came out. But you can see all the stitch patterns in the velvet came out in the glass. And her feet are here, and you can see I'm probably going to recast her feet. So even though you make this, all these parts, and you get to this point where you've created the whole section you need, you may find that they still just don't look right. And you can see that her toes didn't come out quite perfect. So most likely I'm going to recast her feet because the rest of her came out so good. It's hard to put a part on that didn't come out perfect. So, you know, even though it's expensive to remake stuff and you have to backtrack, that quality control often makes me recreate parts. And that's why I section the pieces, is so that if something goes wrong, I can still, you know, cast her new feet if I don't like them.
And Oben, this would be a nice piece to talk a little bit about coloration. We've had a few questions asking whether you use glass color or if you're rubbing paint on your pieces. Could you address that?
Sure, this is all glass color. And glass, you know, I studied as a painter. So for the most part, I think I approach sculpture like a painter, in that I put down a base color, and that base color sort of sets the mood for the piece, but it is not the final outcome. And up until recently, I really did heavily paint most of my figures. This piece is not going to be painted. This piece is, in fact, going to be resolved with cold working, because I don't think it needs it. I think that the glass color is enough, and that her features really are subtle and translate well without the high contrast of a very graphic paint job. Typically, I'll do the paint because it's a higher contrast, and so you see the figure from across the room. But I'll talk a little bit about that in the next stage. But primarily, I think less is more, and the less glass color you use, the more subtle you can control it, the better the emotional state of the figure, because really the color is the emotion of the figure. It translates to the emotional state of the figure. So that's what I'm pursuing when I add an element of color to a sculpture. Are there any more questions here? Can we move on to the next
We can
page?
address one more. We've had a couple questions regarding your use of fabric. How hot
Sure.
is the wax when you pour it on the fabric, and how are you adhering the fabric to the clay? So just a little more about that process.
Well, the fabric really comes in at the wax stage. So it's after the clay has been, a mold has been made of the clay, and then a wax has been poured. And that wax will allow me to use wax directly to freeze that fabric. So I will dress the wax figure with fabric, and then pour hot wax into that fabric and freeze it around the figure. And then, as you saw on the previous stage, once that's melted out, that fabric can be peeled out and the impression of the fabric is left in that plaster. And so that's what we blow glass into. And this figure is in fact hollow, even though she looks solid, which is an aspect I like as well. I see the human body as a vessel, and that vessel can then be filled with more content in the next stage of the process.
Okay, great. Thanks, Oben. We can continue on now, and we'll have a few more questions later.
Sure. So I'm going to take you guys in here to show you part of the assembly stage. And this is actually a piece that I haven't shown anyone yet, but it's an experiment. And part of doing this is trying new things and using new media. So this is actually a piece made from one of the original clay pieces you saw. And this head was blown at CCA actually. And I wanted to start trying to build, I had this idea, I wanted to make a woman wrapped in a blanket of nails. And so you can see the armature here. What it is it's a steel armature with a steel mesh, a woven mesh that's put around it. And it's the understructure for the sculpture. So even though I work a lot in glass, the opportunity to use other media really comes in this assembly stage, and I can take a piece of glass that wasn't huge and incorporate it into a larger composition using other media. And so over here, I'm going to show you guys the blanket itself. This is in fact a woven mesh blanket, and all those little ties you guys see are the stitching that holds it together. And let's see if you guys can check this out. This is going to be wrapped around the figure so that she's got a blanket of nails all sticking out from her. And the hope is that I can translate this by using this woven mesh. I can translate the feeling of fabric into metal, and then really have this fairly defensive pose of her wrapped in this blanket. And I'll probably incorporate a foot coming out the bottom of the armature, and then her hand and her arm will come in right here and hold the blanket up. So I spend a lot of time trying to figure out compositions that will sort of shock people out of what they're used to seeing in glass art. I think that there's such an opportunity to work with the contrast of media that I will often have quite a bit of engineering involved in trying to make a figure stand and create this illusion that it should look effortless, like she just wrapped herself in this blanket. So I'm going to walk over here and show you guys some finished work now. And so here we have the first figure you saw, and this is actually the first glass figure to come out of that. Let me see if I can get this adjusted here. So this is the first figure you guys saw, and this is actually a two-part glass piece. The fabric section is one mold, and then her upper body is another mold, and her head has been polished. And so in spite of the fact that she was in that very specific pose to start, this has been the first outcome in glass. And I really like that aspect of being able to change the context of the figure, because you're not locked into to one composition. You really end up being able to do multiples, and each one is different. And so she's done in like a two-part there was a fade of blue glass done in the upper body. And then the lower body is actually two different colors blended together. The goal being to change the mood of the figure. You know, you really have a different feel in this one than, say, some of the ones that you saw on the shelves there. And she's much more subtle. And this is really the first piece that I did that I did not paint. I decided to resolve her pretty much with just polishing and clear media. And I'm pretty happy with the way it came out. She's got so many different sort of gestural patterns in her garment. It really translated well in the glass color.
And we are actually having a few more questions on color, Oben, if we could
Sure.
delve into that a little bit more. People are just wondering about the color variation, how you choose your colors. Are you using a color overlay and then grinding part of it away? It's just kind of trying to explain a little bit, if you can, about how you're achieving that variation and density of the color.
Sure. This is actually, I mean, for the glass people here, this is a stuff cup, which is a method of putting a bubble of one color into a cup of another color. And by doing that, I layered the two, and I was able to sort of get this gradient fade from a dark cobalt blue to a light sky blue. And what I love about the mold process is it really does accentuate those based on how much the bubble is stretched in the mold. So in places where the mold expands out farther, you'll get a deeper blue from the undercolor, and places where it's condensed, you'll get a denser color from the exterior color. And that kind of accentuates the folds of the fabric and really allows for more contrast in the variation. With regard to color choice, again, it's really about creating a mood. And I really see color as translating to the emotional state of the figure. To me, that feeling is direct in terms of which color you choose. And so I will often try and use as little glass color as possible, because I again think less is more. And often will fade out color, as in the head in the piece you're looking at. It fades to clear, and that so often will give it a subtlety that if you were to blow it all in one homogeneous tone, you would lose that. It would start to feel plasticized in a way, or more homogeneous.
And can any of your sculptures be placed outdoors, Oben, or are they only for indoor display?
I haven't done a lot of outdoor, but I think some of them could. These ones you're looking at now probably would be not good outside, but I am interested in outdoor sculptures, and I have started to look into ways to make pieces more weatherproof. But as of now, these ones are for the most part meant for interior display only. So this is a piece that was actually made at Tacoma Museum, and that allowed me to really play with a lot more glass technique that I don't usually delve into. It's so easy to distract from the figure by using too much glass technique. And so this piece is actually a cane piece where we did a cane roll up. And what I really love about it is this little twist inside the head, which was the goal, to get this sort of semi-psychedelic look to the interior of her head, as though this is the state of mind she's in. And it worked really well. You can see the bubble inside her face. Those are things that you just can't predict. You just hope that it works the way you intended in the glass studio. So I must have made 5 of these, and this one is the one that came out. You never know quite, how it's going to fold, the distribution of the lines in here. All of that was really kind of unpredictable. And that risk of risking a figure that's taken this much time to create is part of kind of the excitement of working in the hot shop. You really get to this sort of exciting experience of not knowing what will come out. And most of my pieces anneal for about 10 days in the kiln. So we have 10 days to anticipate and wonder whether we nailed it or not. And in this case, she came out quite well.
Could we talk a little bit, Oben, more about the subject matter? Jan Smith wanted to know if you could speak more about the connection you have with the subject and your inspiration for your work. Is there an altruistic intention to the work?
It's, in a way, it's very, it's a personal narrative for me. And one thing I've realized a lot recently, I used to really tell people everything about who the figure was to me and why I made them and what my reasons were, what the context was in my own life. And I think one thing I've realized is that these are vessels for other people to project what they see in them. So I'm much more cautious about telling my personal narrative when I think in some contexts it really changes what other people see in it. And so these are all people from my personal life that for whatever reason ended up being a sculpture. But I've been surprised by the narratives other people tell me, especially when they've bought a piece and lived with it for some years. The narrative really changes and it becomes their own. And that's one thing I like about figurative art in general, is that they are there to be projected upon. And so people tend to find their own stories in them.
Great, thank you.
So here's a piece that would probably be able to go outside. This is actually a bronze figure. And, after all the work that goes into doing a nude, it's hard to always cover it up. So in this case, I've actually gone with the nude figure. And this is actually the first piece I did in bronze. And you can see she's sitting on a glass pillow. And again, the goal was to really make her appear that she is floating. So when sunlight hits her, more than the light you see her in now, the pillow really illuminates. And then she feels kind of like she's floating off the surface a little more. And you can see that the tone of the pillow actually changes. So when you get over the top of it, it turns blue. And from the side, it's green. And, just trying to create a balance between medium is often a huge part of it, because one is opaque and one's transparent, and you're trying to balance them in the same composition. So I've enjoyed trying to pursue figures in another medium, because for years everything was made out of glass, and so now I've kind of been able to move forward with versions of figures in different media.
And Oben, someone is asking whether you have ever made your figures through kiln casting instead of blowing the molds in the hot shop. And I know you spoke at some point in the past about ladle casting. Maybe you could expand upon that.
Sure, I use all these techniques. I kiln cast parts, I blow other parts, I hot ladle other parts, and then it's sort of whichever is the best way to get that section of the sculpture out. That's the method I'll use. So I don't feel constrained to say I'm a kiln caster or a glass blower. As a sculptor, I think they're tools in the toolbox. and you use whatever is the best way to get the effect you're looking for. So, for example, the piece that you're looking at now is another version of the bronze piece you just saw, and her body is blown, but her legs are cast, and they were in fact ladled because I could get a clarity that I didn't want the veiling that is so often a part of kiln casting. And so if I have solid parts, I much prefer to ladle them simply for the clarity of the glass. And you can see here that these are actually cast into a colloidal silica called Mold Mix 6. So not every mold is the same material. Sometimes when ladling, I'll use a different mold technique. And then all these pieces are put together like a puzzle. So these legs were cast to fit this figure after the figure was blown. And you can see that this figure was also made at Tacoma Museum and was another one of our cane series. So she's got this great little twist of red cane inside her head that really kind of accentuates the mood of the sculpture. And you can see as she turns towards you, it sort of illuminates her whole face. She glows.
And can you give us a sense of the scale of the works as you're going through and showing them to us?
Sure. The last few you saw are all about 24 inches tall. I think she's about 22 inches tall. She's about 16 inches wide. And, most of my work is on this scale. I think in the case of the green piece you saw previous, that's about the most glass we can blow, which is about 70 pounds of glass in a single bubble. And, the more you do as a single object, the more risk there is. So by breaking them into parts, I'm really able to reduce the risk of losing the whole sculpture. Like the red figure you saw in the cold shop, I can remake the feet and not have to remake the whole figure.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and last but not least, we have this figure. I'm sorry her face is a little blown out by the lighting, but I'm going to try and get a little closer and maybe the camera will adjust. But you can see that this is another version of the same figure. And she has cement legs and a steel base. And then she sort of fades into glass at the waist here. And you can see that then she has this really brilliant red. This was another stuffed cup, also done at Tacoma Museum. And then her head is actually glued on separately and cold worked on there at the sweatshirt. And you can see there is a red glow inside her head. I actually mounted a glass prism inside the hollow blown head. So you can see this red prism is actually hanging sort of in the center of her head and refracts light really dramatically. It doesn't translate on Zoom quite as well as it does in real life, mostly because it emanates so much light by being a cut prism. It really it's like a glowing energy inside her head, which was the goal. And again, that goal is to make the figure feel alive. So I'm trying to use light to translate into energy, and that energy translates to life energy, and makes the figure really feel like she is a living person.
Oben, can you have you or one of your assistants stand next to that piece so they can get an idea of the scale? Because that's a different scale than the other work since it's a full figure.
Sure. Let's see if I can transfer this. So she's pretty big. She's probably at about 51 inches tall, and she's on an 18-inch pedestal here. So, this is probably as big as I usually go with figures. I don't like to do things in life size. I think that it sort of pulls people into your narrative or the world of the figure by keeping the scale either below life size or above life size. So I really don't ever do things that are directly life size, because they have that feeling of being life cast. You see a lot of life cast figures, and I find that it sort of pulls a viewer into the world of the figure rather than having the figure exist in the full scale world of people. So that's about the last figure I've got. Are there any other questions we have here?
We have a few more. You know, you showed us pieces like the one with the velvet fabric that had such fine detail on it. And Marco was wondering, after you blow the bubble into the mold, do you fire it to a higher temperature in order to achieve that really fine capture of the detail, or do you just go straight to annealing after blowing into the mold?
It's a one-shot deal. So when we sort of time it, we try and pull the mold out of the kiln with enough time for it to cool down just a little bit, and that will control the amount of texture we get, the amount of extremities that will fire polish, parts that may or may not fill in the mold based on air pressure and how hot the mold is. So the molds are preheated, and then we pull them out of the kiln and we drop the bubble into them, and it all happens in about a 30-second process. And so that's like risking everything. It's this one moment where you either get those little threads of detail or you don't. And if you go in hot enough and the bubble is shaped right, you're able to really get that impression to translate into the glass. But if it's too cold, if the bubble gets hung up and blows out more on one side than the other, then those are the things that you're risking in this process. But what I love about it and what's different about casting is that you don't get to control those things. So if I want the outside edges of the garments to fire polish and have a different surface quality than say the broader surface areas, I can control that by when the mold is pulled out of the kiln.
Okay, great. And someone's asking about the standing figure behind you. How much of the color is glass and how much is paint?
There's very little paint on her. All of the color you see in here is all glass color. And then see if I can get a little closer here. The paint is really to just sort of accentuate her details. So you can see a very small amount of oil paint. It's monochromatic. I only used one tone of paint in here. But it's really just so that when you're back here and you see her from across the room, she has a deeper presence and you can see her eyes. It probably doesn't translate as well on video here, but the paint is really just rubbed into the details, and then most of it is actually rubbed back off. I'll wipe off almost all the paint that I can get back off the figure.
Okay, we've got a few more questions. Let's see here. Someone's asking about the joining of the sections. Maybe you can touch on that a little bit in terms of the adhesive process.
Sure. These are generally, I use silicone. I use a construction grade silicone, mostly because it adds a little gasket. So when you're making glass parts that are going to get moved around and you know, this figure, this piece of art is going to have a life of its own, hopefully long after I'm gone. And so I want to make sure that the longevity of the figure is sort of secure in the way it was engineered, and that even someone who doesn't know the thin parts or how it was made can still assemble it. So there are parts that are permanently glued, like the head to the body, and there are other parts that come apart, like the torso comes off the legs, and it's actually a peg system that has metal plates laminated into it so that I can have puzzle piece connection that's like a peg in a hole. And that allows me to engineer in metal rather than trying to engineer everything in glass. And so this is a cement legs, and then a plate is added to the bottom of the glass. That is glued on with silicone, and that silicone is like a little shock absorber gasket that keeps any shock from translating into the figure.
Okay, great. Well, I think that we have covered the questions. David, I know that you tentatively have a show scheduled for Oben, bearing with the situation with COVID. Do you want to touch on that or say anything else?
Sure. Well, you guys are getting something of a preview. Oben, I think a really productive year for you is maybe 8 pieces. So you guys are seeing a lot of work there. And we're going to have a show of whatever kind of show will be allowed to have in California in March. Virtual, actual, digital. So we've already photographed most of the pieces that I think all the pieces you saw today, with the exception of the red one that was in the cold shop. So if anybody would like to see images, either of what you saw today or ongoing as we complete things, you're welcome to email or call me. Shameless plug, david@austinartprojects.com. And I think I see so many friends here. I think a lot of you have my phone number as well. So yeah, we'll planning on having Oben in Palm Desert in March, the world allowing. Thank you, Demetria.
Of course. We do have another question that popped into the chat, Oben. Who did you study with?
Oh, I should mention, I studied with Clifford Rainey at CCA, and I was a painting major before I met Clifford, and he really inspired me to pursue glass. It just seemed like a medium that had so much unexplored territory. And as a painter, I felt I was entering an arena where just about everything that could be painted had been painted already. So when I saw his work, I think I first saw Clifford's work in a show of the Sachs collection at the de Young Museum in 1997. And I just was blown away. I thought, I had no idea you could make stuff like that in glass. And seeing his work and then later getting to study with him really inspired my whole career, I would say.
All right, great, thank you. Looks like we have someone that is asking about prices. I don't know if that's something you'd like to address or to just email people individually.
Yeah, I can go ahead, Oben. Sorry.
I'll let you take that one, David.
Yeah, you're never supposed to discuss business, buddy. You're the artist. On the glass pieces, they range from like 32 to 38,000, with the exception of the one that is behind Oben, which I think was 54,000. And I think the bronze piece that's on the glass pillow is a little less. I think that one's 28,000, correct, Oben?
Yeah, and I think this piece is actually, I think, already spoken for, but I think all the other ones are still available.
Yeah, it is spoken for, you're correct.
David, why don't you repeat the name of your gallery, please?
Well, it's Austin Art Projects in Palm Desert, and the email is just david@austinartprojects, and projects is plural.
All right, great. Well, I really appreciate your generosity today, Oben. You were so incredible in terms of the insight and how much you shared with us regarding your process. Thank you, David, also for being with us. Really an exceptional presentation.
Privilege on my part. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Oben and David. That was fantastic.
Yeah, and thank all of you for joining me here. I really appreciate the interest in my work.
Thank you, Oben.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Hey, Judy, Bruce. Hey, how are you?
You're as polished
Happy
as your
holidays.
glass, Oben.
Thank you.
Oben, you've grown a lot, buddy. Really
Thank you.
a lot of
Thanks
great
very
work.